Hi everyone, and welcome to Module 15. And this is a chapter, our last learning module of class, where we're going to talk about the aftermath of mass murders and serial killers. Before we get to that, though, let's take a look back at Module 14. In Module 14, you read chapters 22 of the textbook, where we talked about the weapons that mass murderers choose to use. There were 3 additional articles to read that supplements chapter 22, as well as 2 videos and a podcast to listen to. Your homework for last week were the discussion questions and your final quiz, which was on mass. It was on section 3, which was the mass murder section. So that's module 14. Let's take a look at module 15. In module 15, as I mentioned, we're going to look at the aftermath of mass murders. Your material for this week is chapters 23, which is coping with tragedy, and the aftermath of serial killers and mass murders. So we're going to look at a victim-centric type of look at it, and then we're also going to look at the postscript chapters, which is the final page of the text. You also have 3 additional articles to read: the aftermath of mass shootings, exploring the dark side, the impact serial killers have on society, and then again, we're going to talk about why we are so fascinated by serial killers. So it's going to go full circle. We're going to talk about, we started off the semester talking about why we are so interested in these mass murders, and then we're going to wrap it up with the same type of material. You also have a video on the same subject, why we like serial killers so much, or why we are so interested in it, and the aftermath of mass shootings in the United States. There's also a podcast about mass shootings and what we should do after a mass shooting. Your So let's get into talking about the final chapter, chapter 23. In chapter 23, it's entitled Coping with Tragedy. Chapter 23 starts off talking about one of the more infamous serial killers known as John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne Gacy's, he ended up killing 29 people, or there were 29 bodies. He killed more people, but there were 29 bodies that he buried underneath his house, underneath the, what do you call it, the speakeasies? I don't know if it's speakeasies, underneath the floorboards of his house. And so they actually showed on TV where people were, they showed on TV, like the news stations would show like the coroner's office and the medical examiners actually taking the bodies out of the house. And sometimes we get these types of situations affect us, even though we don't particularly know the victims, or we know John Wayne Gacy in general. But sometimes these traumatic events could have an impact on our life. Some people celebrate these types of individuals by, like as I mentioned in previous weeks, about buying memorabilia from it. For example, when it came to Jeffrey Dahmer, when they destroyed his apartment complex, people ended up trying to buy bricks, or they did buy bricks from the destroyed apartment complex building. We tend to have to deal with these types of individuals later on in life, whether they're in prison. We hear from them afterlife, I shouldn't say in the afterlife, but while they're incarcerated, we hear about them. They do news stories. Charles Manson, we heard about for 30 years while he was in prison. Jeffrey Dahmer, even though he died 3 years after being convicted, he did interviews on television as well. We have to deal with these. A lot of times we can be traumatically affected by these when it comes to anniversaries of their death. I know every year in Colorado they do something for the victims that were killed in Columbine, as they do in Connecticut for the Sandy Hook shootings. Sometimes the surviving victims are often forgotten about, but yet these people don't necessarily go by. Sometimes some of these surviving victims create organizations. For example, we all are aware of Adam Walsh Victim Resource Center that his father created on his behalf. His father actually went on and created a television show called America's Most Wanted. Other organizations create support groups like Parents of Murdered Children and stuff like that, which was actually an agency that I actually worked with for a short period. I didn't work with them, like for them, but I worked with them. And they actually have done some training for our agency as well. Sometimes we see these memories. We have to relive these events when the media, places like HBO or Netflix, create docudramas or fiction. I don't want to say fictionalized, but kind of make movies about them that we all want to watch, because they are interest that so always, a lot of times we find these interesting. Um, I've talked about how podcasts have become popular, true crime podcasts and true crime in general. Um, and so a lot of times when these stories are brought onto television, whether it be Netflix or onto a podcast, the surviving victims are either forced to listen to them or asked about them by other people in the community, and then it tends to re-victimize them. Because we tend to place blame also, because there's really no motives in a lot of these types of crimes. The notion that the killers get away with murder, a lot of times it delays the family process. Sometimes these cases can go on and on and on in our court systems, and it tends to re-victimize the families. Frustrated families often seek alternative channels for expressing their unsolved pain. They may turn in a positive way, they may go towards support groups or try to get some type of political action going on. Um, in less productive ways, families of other mass murderers have sought resolution by identifying their scapegoats for their rage. They tend to blame the police. If the police would, say, in like Jeffrey Dahmer's case, if they would have stopped him after his first or second victim, when the police went there, when there was a man ran out of the apartment complex and had done their job at the beginning, he wouldn't have been able to get other victims. Um, so that's an example of they would blame the police officers for not doing their jobs, and sometimes rightfully so. Um, we tend to Monday morning quarterback a lot of these situations. We say, like, if we would have had tougher gun laws, a lot of the school shootings wouldn't have happened. Um, we talk about um, when it came to the Sandy Hook shooting in Connecticut, the mother of Adam Lanza was blamed for it. Had she had recognized some of the mental health issues with Adam in the hours before the shooting, she might have been able to stop it or call the police to have it stopped. Um, but we don't really know if that's actually the case. It's easy to condemn the persons, but in reality, it doesn't do anything to fix the situation. We look at conspiracy theories. Sometimes we even hear, when we go back to Sandy Hook, some people say that it's a conspiracy theory, that it really didn't happen and it's just a made up situation by the media. Um, um, for example, in November of 2021, a Connecticut judge ruled against an individual by the name of Alex Jones, holding him civilly responsible for the unnecessary anguish he caused the Sandy Hook families through his reckless distortion of the truth. Then in October of 2022, a jury set an award that Jones would have to pay the litigants a total of $965 million, or whatever amount he ends up having to pay the victims. It was an important victory because it kind of helps to, like, keep other people from trying to do those types of things. Another conspiracy theory is with the school shooting in Parkland, Florida, where people believe that the surviving victims were called actors after they became vocal proponents of gun control. When a tragedy like this happens, it's psychologically beneficial to blame a certain organizations that we feel is at fault, rather than accept a potentially random nature of mass shootings. We could argue, like, if we didn't necessarily have guns at access, we could have other ways to complete it. Say, for example, if we go to the Aurora, Colorado shooting, if he didn't have guns, you could argue that the individual could have used some sort of bomb and perhaps even killed more victims. So that's kind of a look at the aftermath of mass shootings, or mass murders and serial killers. It's just something that we have to deal with, no matter what the tragedy is. I know personally, I work with sex offenders, and I know a lot of times the sexual assault victims have a lot of trauma, and sometimes their trauma is worse than an individual who's a surviving victim of a murder, simply because they still have to deal with their trauma. And a victim of a murder obviously doesn't, because they're dead, but yet the family members still have to deal with that trauma for the rest of their lives. So living through trauma is a real thing, and if you've ever had a situation where that's happened to you or anyone that you know, I would encourage you to get some help for that, because it's something that you shouldn't have to deal with on your own. So your assignments for this week are the Module 15 discussion questions. I'm sorry, before I get to that though, let me go back and say, in addition to Chapter 23, you also have Chapter 24, which is just a postscript to the material. It's only 2 pages. And so it's not really anything that's too intense. It just kind of wraps up the whole entire book. Also in Module 15, you have some other some other readings on mass shootings that you should read. So make sure you take a look at those as well. Your assignments for this week are the Module 15 discussion questions, in which you are going to answer 2 questions. There's 2 questions which you pick from. One is on Chapter 30, 331 of the text. The author writes, over the past 2 decades, criminologists, criminal justice officials, and the public have become sensitive to the needs, problems, and concerns of those left behind and to grieve the murdered loved ones. The suffering created by the exposure of the traumatic event, like multiple murder, is referred to as vicarious or secondary victimization. What is meant by this term, vicarious or secondary trauma, and what are some effects of it? Second question is why do you think so many serial killers and mass murderers are either killed by police or commit suicide? What effect do you think this has on the killer's surviving family members? So we're looking at the after effects of serial killers and mass murderers, both not on the surviving member's family, but also on the victim's family as well. The victims and the perpetrator's family, that is. So again, pick one of these questions, answer it by Thursday of this week, and respond to your classmates by Saturday so that you can get your attendance recorded. Your final project is due on Friday of this week. Again, just to recap what this is about, you're going to pick your killer, whether it be a serial killer or a mass murderer. It can't be someone who just killed one person. It has to be a serial killer or a mass murderer. You're going to write pick the article, and the introduction is going to explain your killer and what they did. You're going to give me a brief background of what they did, what their antisocial behavior was before their killing spree, if they had any, what was their MO or their modus operandi, and how they picked their victims, and did it change over time. There are some examples of where that did happen. What are their rituals were, if they changed over time. How did they pick the ritual? Did they keep any trophies, stuff like that? Did they experiment with different avenues? Did they start with one type of victim and change to something else? Did they get involved with like animal cruelty and graduate to killing people? What theory or typology best explains their behavior? And then your last paragraph should be a conclusion. Please make sure you submit this in APA format. There are links throughout the modules or throughout Canvas that will take you to what you need to do. In the assignment description, I do have a link to the APA format, and within that there is an APA sample paper. If you struggle with grammar, I would make sure that you contact the Writing Center to get some help with that. Please make sure that you submit it grammatically correct. You submit it in APA format. Make sure your paper has a title page, an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. And make sure you submit it in a format that I can open it, because if I can't open it, then I can't grade it. So just a reminder, you can do this as a paper, and if you don't do it as a paper, you could do it as a presentation where you're presenting a video to me on screen. You could submit it in a YouTube video like this one here in a limited audience, or you can do some combination of both. If you do it as a video, I still need a copy of your references. You can either have those at the end of your video, or you could put those in a separate document, in a Word document. So we are in week 15, so hopefully you are just about done with this assignment. Just please make sure you submit it by Friday so I have some time to grade it before you work on your final exam, which leads me to my next subject. Is week 16 is our final week together. And the only thing you should be doing this week is your final exam, which I will do a brief review in next week's preview. So please let me know if you have any questions about this week's material, upcoming final assignment, or anything else for that matter. So I hope you all have a good week, and I look forward to reading your projects. Thank you.